Okay, so I am recording this video as a part of the How to Take a Test project. We had a great working session earlier today, and you're seeing this in its place because for whatever reason, my settings were completely wrong on my network software, and we recorded an hour and 20 minutes of everybody's voice. So complete meltdown, trying to get a couple things configured and set up so I could re-record this, and wound up having to reboot my machine on top of it. So I'm going to do my best to replicate and or discuss the things that were covered. But bear with me because this will not be an exact replica of what we did in that session. I'm going to cover the major key points as I remember them, and we'll hopefully have a good record that you guys can work with here. Okay. So I am going to bring up the Trello board to kind of remind me where things were. We did work on setup of the unit test protections. And actually there we spent more time discussing what happened on the Trello board protection. So in the previous session last Thursday, we had built a GitHub workflow, which I'm going to go into here and take a quick look at. And we had added this file. We had pushed this up, and the team had helped me merge it in. And in that discussion of merging it in, I had this smaller side discussion on the simple fact that when you open a pull request, the expectation would be you would be the one to close the pull request. We had some excited people, and I understand that, okay, that haven't worked with this many branches and this way of working with things. And my pull requests got merged in, but I wanted to use that as a learning point, not pointing out anybody did anything right or wrong, just simply saying the individual that opens a pull request should be the individual that closes the pull request. Part of that is that individual has a deeper understanding of what's going on with that code. And maybe there's some documentation update, or maybe a test that needs to be improved. Maybe they had some side discussion with somebody, and if you close that out for them, they may not be ready for that. They may have had, one of the ones that I see quite frequently is a team lead will have a discussion with somebody and, hey, can you hold off on merging that code until we get XYZ done? Okay. So we did get this merged in. Don't care how it got merged in. It got merged in. But I also noticed at the end of that day that it hadn't triggered. We had another individual, Ketelin, who had opened a pull request, and this should have fired. I spent 4 hours struggling with why that didn't fire. I mean, I was checking everything, every assumption I could come up with, every thought I could come up with on why. And eventually I reached a point after 2 or 3 hours of poking at the bee's nest when I went to Stack Overflow and opened up probably 30 or 40 tabs and spent some time digging through and looking at what kind of problems people had on why GitHub Actions hadn't fired. About 3/4 of the way through, I ran into somebody that said, hey, I had this kind of a problem a while back, and what I found was that the Stack Overflow, the GitHub Actions portion of GitHub was down, and he had a link to where you see that, and I don't have the link. I'll have to track the link down. But I went out there, and sure enough, it had been down for 5 hours for almost the entire window on when I had been working on it. Doesn't seem to be a common thing. Doesn't seem to usually take that long to get it repaired. But the other fun part was several hours later when, if we go here to the GitHub Actions and see what actually fired, you see several of these are green. That's what we expect. But all these red ones, I got like this barrage of emails saying, hey, you had a bunch of GitHub Actions that ran that failed. And I had this kind of flashback to one of the projects I had previously worked on had what's called an eventual consistency database. And what this means is we had a database that had several nodes that ran on the machine, and the idea being that each node can handle a certain amount of load, and it would load balance as people requested from the database. It was eventual consistency because each node had some portion of the data. So as you wrote something to that database on, say, node 3, that node 3 would update 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 whenever it got to it. So if things were really busy, 4 and 5 may not have that information. If you went to request it, you wouldn't get it. Now, this does kind of reflect back to this, because this GitHub action fired when GitHub felt like firing it. It did fire significantly later than I expected it to. And as a developer, I probably should have been aware of what was going on there. In addition, I wanted to go in here. I want to take a look at what happens inside of a GitHub action. The team and I have gone through, and this is waiting on pending job, so we can't look at that one. Let's go in here and find one of these that we can look at. And wow, this is really not letting us see stuff. So let's go in here to one of the newer ones. And we'll take a look at this, okay? And what I wanted the team to see was when we had this code where in our GitHub on pull request, okay? So what we're doing here, this is on pull request on the main branch. We want to run a build, okay, with this build job. Inside the build job, it's on pull request, okay? This is the one we linked into our settings. And I want to show you that because I don't think I showed the main group that real quick. We have a strategy. We're running it on node 18. Did have a problem with the versions. All the versions are now up to v3, which is the latest ones for these types, uses the correct version of node. Some of them are apparently were running on node 12, which they're deprecating out, okay? But we have these additional names in here, checkout and node, which would be 18, whatever the version is, and then actions cache, and then test. Now you look at those, and we come back over here to this, and we have the setup job and checkout. And then, checkout was one of the ones that was listed, then node 18, then we run the action cache, and then we test. Then there's all this post cleanup stuff, okay? But if you look at the setup job, it's installing an operating system. It's getting GitHub token permissions. Since this action is running on our repository from within it, it can get proper permissions. If you're pushing to some other outside service, AWS or whatever cloud service, whatever you use to host, you can get tokens from that host, and you can store them in your GitHub secrets so that your YAML file can actually reference those secrets, okay? In this case, for a really basic GitHub Actions, the permissions are assumed. It picks those up. I don't have to tell it to get specific tokens, okay? It downloads the actions that we're going to run, okay? When that's done and that completes, then we run that checkout. That's the one that we built, okay? It uses the GitHub checkout. It checks out our repository. It pulls the code onto this machine. This is actually a computer running somewhere that's letting us do things, and it does run in containers, kind of like Docker. I'm not sure if it's Docker, not 100% sure, but something along those lines, okay? And then we run the node 18 setup, which the GitHub setup node, it's actually configuring this Linux environment to run node, okay? In particular, node 18. We run the action cache, and the cache goes, hey, what do we have out there in cache that we can pull back that can make this thing run a little bit faster? It's going to pull back node modules. Node modules is typically pretty big and takes a long time to set up. A lot easier to pull that cache in 2 seconds. Then when we run the npm install, it only has to update, okay? And then in the test portion, we do that. We run the CI, the npm CI, which is a node install, but it's a minimal. It's for running in your prime environment. So when we're running for, in this case, to run it in a CI/CD pipeline, this optimizes, okay? So it runs through everything, checks to see if there's any updates that we have to do. Since there aren't, it goes on to run the ng test. It runs the ng tests. And one of the things I pointed out here was how you get the numbers on each of the tests as it runs through that normally get updated really cleanly in your terminal, because it can do this little ASCII updating trick. And because we're not running on a terminal, it logs every single one of those as those changes come through. We had 4 successes, and so it was able to move on. And from there, it's just cleaning up. Because it had success, it allows our PR, pull request, to run through cleanly. So if we go look at our project on the pull request to give you an idea where you see that, I want to look at one of the closed ones here real quick. What you would normally see is as you come down here, down at the bottom, you'll have a big stack of requirements and can it be merged in. And so one of the ones you may have seen is where you authorize 2 or 3 people. Okay, right after that, we would normally have, hey, the checks have run and passed or run and failed. Okay, and that in this case will be one of the potential blockers. In the configuration, which I don't think I showed the team this afternoon, what I want to show you is as we come down here on branches, we have a branch protection rule, and as we edit this branch protection rule, we now have require status checks to pass before we merge, require branches to be up to date before merging, and then you see down here the status checks that are required is on pull request version 18x. If we look back at our code, we have on pull request, and it's running node 18x. Okay, so this is the key to making it block the pull request if the unit tests aren't passing. Okay, one of the ones we saw that we went through in the project had to do with a pull request that was done. Now let's go see if we can find that pull request and jump in and get into some detail on that one. It's a closed one. It's okay. We can look at a closed one. And we were doing the added Angular material. Okay. This was Catalan. And, we did have some conversation on this. So he added this toggle, which I thought was an awesome way to show that it worked. Okay. And we'll take a look at his code here in a second, but he pointed out, and he did correctly connect this to the Scrum board. But he got this warning message, and it came up in, I found out later, came up in the console log after he had run it. Okay. And I purposely gave him some fake notes. Okay. I referenced this Angular material page, and we'll go there in a second. Well, let's go there now. Because I knew what he was missing, and I knew why he was missing it. Okay. He had done a basic Angular install. If we take a quick look at the file changes over here, forget this first one because that's actually the fix. Okay. Package lock and package updated. Okay. That's expected when you're installing something. The Angular CDK, I don't know why that updated, but that's fine. It needed it for material for some reason. Okay. We installed material 15.2 because we're doing a 15 project. He updated the app component HTML. This is where I put the toggle in. Okay. In the front end component spec, the mat slide toggle was added to the unit tests. So this is one. Let's hang on to that. I'll come back to that one. The app module he updated with the mat slide toggle, bringing in the mat slide toggle as an import. I did a little bit of cleanup here in between. Okay. So the fix, let's go to that, and then we'll come back to the unit test part of it. Okay. The fix was pretty simple. I brought him to this page, and I have harped on the quality of the Angular documentation. And what I'm talking about there is the Angular team's website on how Angular works. The documentation for Material UI has gone through fluxes. It's been really good at times, it's been awkward at times, and we're in one of those awkward phases. Somewhere along the line, it went from this really clean, hey, these are the 8 steps you have to do to install Material UI, to, hey, we have this entire article on how to do it. And I know the answers right here on this page, on the screen. Okay, I've been here before. I ran into this problem in between one time using the really good documentation to not as good an improvement in the documentation. Okay. And it's in the weirdest place. You would think it would be in, we want to use one of your built-in themes. And what I wanted to point out to the team was sometimes you actually do have to read through the documentation in some depth to find the right answer. And this is one of those cases. Okay, we wanted to use purple green, which is fine. And the error message was coming about. If we come back and we look at the error message, sorry, I went to the wrong place. If we come back and we look at the error message, I'm going to reopen that conversation. Let me bring that over here and come down, and it says, could not find the Angular material core theme. Most material components may not work as expected. So the core theme, what does that mean? That's the theming, right? So here we're talking about theming Angular material. And I know for a fact, because I've read this about 20 times, that what we need is right in this paragraph. Okay. You can find the pre-built theme files in the pre-built themes directory of Angular materials npm package. Okay. It's in the npm folder. Okay. So if we came over here into our stuff, into our project, and somewhere in here, we've got an npm folder inside of our front end, and we come down to node modules, and we come down to Angular, and we come down to Angular material. Somewhere in here, as we scroll down under Angular material, you've got a pre-built themes folder. And guess what? There's our CSS files. They're already built. They're ready to go. And if you just want one of the 4 pre-built themes, they work really nicely. Most people want to tweak it, but this is a good place to start. And my guess was it's going to get rid of that error message. Okay. So we need this Angular material themes, Angular material pre-built themes. To include the pre-built theme, you add it to your add your chosen CSS file to the styles array of the project Angular JSON file. I've been through here many times, and it's always tempting to say, hey, there's a link here. Let's go see what it is. And that link doesn't go anywhere that's worth looking at. Okay. It's a lot of extra material that doesn't get you where you need to go. It's documenting how we fill things in on the Angular JSON file and how we deal with styles, not this specific issue. What we need to look at are the styles array in our project's Angular JSON. So if we then get rid of this, we close this, get rid of this, close this out. We go into our project's project's Angular JSON file, and we search for what do we have? Style. Okay, we've got a couple of places. Okay, so let's go back and look at our page real quick. And it said to look for the styles, plural, array. Okay, oh, there's an array. And I see real quick, we have 4 of them. All right, so what styles? Arrays. And so it's probably going to be something like, looking at that, it's going to be quote unquote, styles colon. Now we're down to 2, right? This one I can see real quick is under options. And as we scroll down, we have another one that's under test. Odds are we don't need the theming under test. Okay. I'm on a different branch at the moment, so I don't have his merged in yet. But what this tells me is I want the build to be updated. So if we come back and we look at the fix that I hid from you for a few seconds, we needed to add that Angular materials pre-built themes, purple, green, into the builds style. Okay, so then it ends up looking something like, if I take this and copy it, I'll put it into that other branch, I'll take it out again later on for my own sanity. It's going to look something like that. That's simple. That's all that was needed to fix that error, to get rid of that error. We did run it, we did test it. I don't need to run it and test it here. I think that's okay to kind of skip that portion, because the next piece we had to look at was, I did notice when we looked, and we can't see it right now, one of the errored actions. Let's see if we could see it. I don't think we can. I think what we saw before was we couldn't. Was the update to node version for actions. Oh, maybe it was. Maybe it was one of these that we looked at. Oh, nope, that's the setup unit tests. Okay, so if we look here, we can see which branch it was on. So it's a material UI. This one failed. But let's take a look at one of these that passed and see what's happening, because one of our updates to material UI here gets rid of the issue that we saw in the run. Okay. So we go in and we look at this run. Oh, it's letting us in very nicely. So I want to see the test. And what we saw here was this part. Okay, and this is one that I'm used to seeing when code is run and the unit tests aren't quite configured right. Okay, I'm used to seeing it, and I want to make sure the team is well aware of this. Okay, so this is an error. It is not a unit test error. This is when Angular is running the unit test, it spins up some part of the application. In spinning up some part of that application, this error message pops out. It is not a failure. Okay, what it's saying is the mat sign toggle is not a known element. This is not enough of an error to stop the unit test from running, and apparently from stopping unit test to run correctly. Okay, that's okay. My issue with this is number one, it's a configuration issue. It's fairly easy to fix. And number two, what you don't want is a project with hundreds of components and thousands of tests. And minimum hundreds of these all over your terminal when you're running your unit tests. It makes it really hard to find what you need when something really is broken. Okay, so we went through how to fix this, and if we go back to the code, we've looked at this one, so let's come down here and look at the app modules, but we'll look at the component spec, which we started to. We skipped back to that one, and we added an import of the mat slide toggle into the unit test, because the unit test does not use the app module for all the importing it and exporting. It has its own import export, and we had to add that mat slide toggle module to its import. And as soon as we added that, then we ran, and we didn't see those issues crop up. So if we come back and we look at our runner here, okay, so in this runner we had the problem, right? So as we come back and we look at the other runs that are available, and we look at the most recent one where the fixes were all added in. Okay, this is the run where we should see, I'm guessing here, because I have not gone in and logged, that the tests are not showing that error message anymore. Okay, that the unit test has now properly importing them at slide toggle. So Angular itself isn't saying, hey, I don't know what this is. Okay, nice, simple, easy cleanup. Makes our tests run nicely and cleanly through the pipeline. And that was the first part of what we covered on our Scrum board. Okay. We covered some of the setup, the unit test protection. We talked through the material color scheme, let folks know that, you know, he's finished the work on this. It's merged in. It's okay to move it to done. I'm not moving it to done for him. Okay. And then we moved on to import a JSON structure, and we went pretty fast through this, but I want to take a look at the code and see where I'm at. I'm not 100% sure I'm at the right place, and I'm opening GitHub desktop off the screen right now so we can take a look at where we are. Okay, so I am on the HTTAT4 branch, and since I don't see anything over here in the changes, that means that I've actually merged that code up, okay, on a branch. So we can actually take a look code there, and there's some really clean ways to look at that code there. Okay, so one of the things that we did here was we looked through the changes. Okay, and one of the things I like to show people, and it's really kind of cool, is if you hit the period key right here, I am now hitting the period key between the comma and the question mark on my keyboard. It processes this request. It's setting up an editor. This is VS Code that it's setting up. Okay, VS Code 1.76. Do I want to read the release notes? No, we don't have to always pop up in the really annoying. I don't need to see that. It shows me comparisons. I don't really need the comparisons. I don't need the preview. What I don't need to make comments. You can do your comments and things like that on a pull request this way if you wanted to. But I like this because it's a really fast way to look through and see the code. Okay, here's the code as it originally was. This is what was added. This is the code as originally was. Here's what was added, where the changes occurred. Nice, clean way to look at it, right? So let's take a look at what happened with. Let's close some of these things out because we've got a whole bunch of stuff open. And when I closed too much out because we do want to stay on the how to take a test. All right. But we want to look at my particular branch. Okay. And that branch is the JSON API service. And we set this up and we ran it, and I'll run it here again. But right now we're looking at all the code. Okay. And we're not looking at a difference between this and our master branch, but we can, again, hit the period key and look at the entire repository if we wanted to. Okay. Just want to make sure you know that that's there. And this is one way to look at it. And we had a PR open. It makes it a little easier just to look at just that PR. Okay. We don't need that. What we have our code. I think that's enough for now. All right. So let's step out of here. Let's come back in and take a quick look at what we did with this project. Part of what we did was I had a couple of people jump in through live share. And really all I had to do was I had to start sharing. It starts up and it copies the link that I need, and I pass that off to the team and they join. And you can use the join here on your own if it's installed and you're logged in. You can do it anonymous. I generally prefer people are logged in, so I know I'm bringing in the right people, especially something like this or have a larger crowd. You can do it in browser or in VS Code. Either one works just as well. Okay. When you're in that live share session, you're working on the code base that's on the machine you're connected to. So since I was sharing, they were working on my code. Okay. And what I had asked was there were two places I wanted us to pay attention to. And within our app, I wanted them to look at the core constant config file. They didn't change anything in here, but that was one of the ones that we need to get changed. We need to update and add a couple more grades. But at the same time, the bigger part was we were modifying this test JSON file. And you can see here, we added up to 8th grade. And we added this test format that we started to work on. And the next time we're going to go through how to take that format and turn it into something that we can use in TypeScript. Okay. We did talk a little bit about TypeScript tonight. So in each grade level, we're giving it a test ID. These tests are in an array. So at each grade level, we could theoretically have more than one test. We're only putting in one for right now. Each one has a test ID of some sort. It has a name. Within the questions, we have a question ID. And we want to know if this is an easy or hard one. It has to do with the timing within the test. We haven't quite gotten that far, but something we wanted to add in. We want our basic question, and then we want our basic answer. Well, the answer can be just a label. This is what's going to be displayed. Okay, so it could be A period space 0, B period space 2, or it could be 0, 2, 3, 4, 5. Don't care. Okay, just that we display it. And we want to know which one's correct. When we set it as Boolean true false here, we could do an array at the question level, but I thought putting it in here, then, if you had a multiple choice where it could be two answers, could lend itself to that. I mean, there's several different ways to do it. This is just one way we're starting. But I wanted them to flesh that out, add some more data. And as you can see, they added more data and they cleaned it up multiple times. At the same time that they were working on that, I came in and we had to add a few pieces into app component, and there were some mistakes. You're not going to see too many mistakes tonight because I'm not going to rebuild this code from the ground up. But we had to add in the HTTP client module. We're going to make an HTTP call to get that data. Okay. I think I initially put it into the declarations instead of into the imports. Took the error message, did a search, and it said, hey, you're putting it in the wrong place. Put it in the imports. I moved that, and all our errors went away. Okay. Once I remembered to save the file, I'm pretty sure there was a time when I didn't save the file and I was kind of going a little bonkers for a few seconds. Okay, we didn't change anything in app component. We changed this on one of our pages where we came in and we looked at our home component, but we wanted to add it to home component. We weren't quite ready to do that yet. So I'm going to close that out real quick. What we added was a service, and we used the command line, and what we actually typed in was something along the lines of within the, let's get in the right place, front end, and we did an ng generate service, and we put it into core / services / API - handler. Okay, so I ran that. I'm not going to run it again because I already have the files there. Okay, which generated these two files. And this is one of the things I really like about the Angular CLI. It takes a little getting used to, but man, it does all the prep work. It built us this service, pretty much empty, and a unit test ready to go. Okay, really simple unit test, just checks to see that it's created. And we're going to add more to that later. So we came in here, we brought a couple things in, and we brought in this config. And config, if you remember, when we looked at it, I'm going to close our terminal down. We'll reopen it here in a few minutes. In our config, we also have this endpoints, okay? And we also have an interface endpoints that we created later. But the first thing we did was we brought this config in, we set up this endpoints, and I created an any over here so that we could do this config.endpoints. Okay, this gets used with get URL. Okay. But let's go down to this get test first. Kind of forget the rest of that's there for the moment. We set up a key. The key references the key of this key value pair in endpoints. Okay. We sent that key to get URL, and it should give us the proper URL address back, which in this case is the assets mock API test JSON, which is down here, assets mock API test JSON. Okay. The get URL takes that endpoints out of this JSON file and dynamically gives us the key. We haven't put any protections into this yet in case it's not there and that kind of thing. This can get more complex, okay? But I wanted to build a simple pattern to be able to get that URL. We wrapped our get request inside of a try catch. And our catch block is really easy. We're going to console log an error at this point. We're going to improve that as we go down the road. But for now, I think that's enough. We assign data to the await. We're waiting for a promise to complete. The get request is an observable. And the old pattern that I used to use was to do a to promise chaining on it. That has been deprecated in favor of using RxJS's first value from. So we get the first value from the observable, which is the response from the HTTP request. Since first value from returns a promise, we can then await that. We get the data back and we assign it to test. Okay, test is a little unique, and I spent some time talking about this. Okay, observables took me a while to get used to. In my case, it was probably closer to 2 years. At some point, I opted to take a deep dive into RxJS and what it could provide, and learned quite a bit about how observables work. Observables are this kind of stream of data, okay? The really nice part about an observable is, at its core, it's got a pub/sub capability, publish, subscribe. Okay, so what I'm doing down here, when I'm doing test.next, is I'm publishing. Any component, any service can subscribe to tests because it's setting up an observable. This particular observable came from my research, which is a behavior subject. There's a whole group of like 4 different subjects. And what I really liked about behavior subject was 2-part. First part is I can trigger a next, which passes in a new data value. Anybody subscribes gets that new data value. Okay. The other thing I liked is it allows me to give it a default value. And we are going to come up with a more complex default value when we get rid of this any. Okay. Remember I said when we were looking at the JSON that we wanted to build a TypeScript structure to kind of match what's in that object. Okay, that'll allow us to kind of define what's required and what's optional. Because of that, we can set some default values and kind of clean things up in our handling when we actually receive data on the component side. Okay, so what you get here looks a little complex. Okay? I want to say it does look a little complex, but what it really gives us is a clean separation between, hey, I made a call to get the data. Once I make the call to get the data, I can forget about it. Any component can make that call. And anybody subscribed to it will receive it. So the act of asking for the data and the act of receiving the data are completely separate. Makes testing really, really, really easy. Okay, this is a pattern I've been using for a while, and I'm a big fan of it, and I push it really hard. From an enterprise level, it makes life so much easier. Okay, so then we did this, and I said we were going to mention this endpoint, so we're going to go to the definition of that endpoint real quick. And this is what we call an interface. And if you're not familiar with TypeScript, do just a quick search of what an interface is. You'll get some information there. But this is essentially a description of an object, a JSON object. In this case, we got the square bracket around name : string, and what we're saying there is what's inside there is essentially codified. Okay, it's not a fixed value. It can change. So on the left side, the key is some name. It's got to be of type string. The value on the right side has to be of type string. That's what we're saying here. So this endpoints are built up of keys that are string, values that are string, and we can have a list of those. There could be any number of those. Okay, and there's no set name that has to be applied on that left side, on the key side. Okay, so that's how the endpoints came together. That's how the behavior subject came together. We did have to bring in the HTTP to be able to do the HTTP GET. We passed it the URL. When it gets done, we tell the observable, hey, we got data. Here's the data. Now we got to use this, right? We built that up in like 10 minutes or so. I've done it a few times. Okay, so now we got to use it, and we use the home component for this one, and we just console logged our data out. But we started with, we need to bring in that API service, right? once we had the API service, we had to subscribe to tests. Remember, we had test over there. That's the behavior subject, the observable. When it changes, when something happens as it's subscribed to it, handler fires. We bind this because it's a class, and because it's a class, when it runs, we want to make sure it uses the class itself, the newed up version of the class itself, as this for the handler function. Okay. Our handler function doesn't do any more than take the data and console log it out. I mean, that's all it does. In fact, I'm missing a semicolon there. I'll put that in right now. We'll save that. Okay. I added the ng on init back to this component, which we had removed previously, because this gave us a place to initiate our GET request. When the component's loaded and ready to receive data, let's initiate our GET request. Okay. In fact, for testing, I usually pull it out, and we'll talk about that as we move forward. Okay. But we put all this in, and I'm pretty sure this is where I forgot to save the file, and I wasn't getting results back. Okay. So let's set things up. You guys get to see a little bit easier version of this because it's not going to fail on us at this point, or at least it shouldn't. We'll find out. So we're going to set things up and run it. We do need to be, where are we at? Oh, home. We're in home. Oh, way down the tree. Doesn't matter. You go up. We're going to go up anyway. We're going to be in the front end folder, and we're going to do an ng serve -- open. We want to see that all these pieces came together. We've got data. We've got an API service that's going to make a call to get that data, and it's going to put it on the observable. We've got the home component that's subscribed itself to the observable. And then when the component's loaded and ready, we'll trigger that GET request, okay, through the API. And that's when this home works, triggers. And what we want to look at is we want to look at the dev tools, and we can see two objects came in. Two objects were console logged. Why two? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's two objects because, let's pull this down so you can see the two objects at the same time. Because if you remember, in our API handler service, we had a default value. Then the call was made and data was put onto test, so a new value would have been emitted out. Two values. Okay, so our first value should look a lot like an empty object. Our second value should be an object with a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. And if we navigated into these, we can see it's an array. And we can see that array looks like a name with questions. And hey, here's a question. And here's a question with a bunch of answers. And look, there's a bunch of answers that have the correct and label. Pretty cool that it was able to go get all that and return all that very easily from a local assets folder, as if it's real data. You know, later on we can have a server that we point our API call to instead of the assets folder. This is one of the reasons we set this up. This gives us a really easy handle on getting our data structures right before we start working with a server. Okay. So going back to the board, we did work on that JSON structure. There's still more to do with it. It's not quite ready to be pushed in because we haven't done unit tests and that kind of thing. So I'm leaving it alone. I'm not going to move it on the board itself out of the fact that it's in dev. It's being worked on. Just real quick, let's see. Let's shut down our server, which is going to crash that. I want to go back to our GitHub real quick and verify. We can't verify the branch unless we check that. But we can go into, this is one of the reasons I like some of the GUI tools. We can go into the history on this branch. Okay, and this is a working for session code. We merged something in 3 days ago, but this is 9 hours ago. So this is when we were actually working on it. So we can see we did the changes in app module, where we added the HTTP client module to the imports. We built that endpoints that we took a look at. We essentially completely built from the ground up the API handler service. Okay. We made some changes, quite a few changes to the home component, including implementing the on init and adding the subscriptions and all of that. And we changed our muck data. So that verifies that we are now looking at what we actually talked about this afternoon. Okay. There were some basic questions that came up, and part of when those questions came up told me that I went a little fast today. Okay. I do want to teach proper techniques with how to use Angular. So next time I'll probably go back through some of this again before we add into what happens on the JSON structure. What I also pushed a little bit is this is a project where folks that are on this team can experiment. Okay. I want you to learn. I want you to jump in and potentially be willing to play with some code. And it's okay to screw it up. It's okay to completely mess it up. Get with me. Just put something on my Calendly, and we'll get together. And if you're okay with it, we'll record it. If you're not, we won't. We'll just talk about it with the team later. All of these are stored on my YouTube channel. And if you're watching this, you're probably on my YouTube channel. I've added the link into the Discord so that people know where that is. Okay. Feel free to jump into something, try something, play with something. If you're not 100% sure, ask a question. I'm here. Okay. This is supposed to be learning. I can build things relatively fast. All right. So next time around, I will take a little extra time and care and make sure I go at a pace that the team's comfortable with. And I really do want to get those questions. I got the questions after we stopped the recording. So that tells me that people weren't comfortable jumping in the recorded time. What I want is you to be comfortable jumping in the recorded time. Okay. Absolute worst case, raise your hand in the session because I'll see that, and that'll tell me to go take a look at the chat. Okay. So we covered a lot of ground. We didn't add any new cards or do any cleanup on the cards. We didn't move things around significantly. I would like to get to potentially doing the build pipeline fairly soon, but I don't know that we're quite ready between the material color scheme and the JSON structure and the API services and things like that we added in. I want to take some time and really talk through what all of that means, and maybe take a little time and look through some of the documentation on observables so that people are comfortable with that. Okay. Don't need a deep comfort. I think a surface comfort's okay with observables for right now. Okay. So, as I said, I completely blew up the record. I'm actually hoping and praying this record went well. I hope this is at least as much value as what we did this morning. We will be doing the times at various times because I know we got people in time zones all over the place. And I want to make sure we reach as many people that want to be a part of this team as possible. Okay. Any questions and things like that, feel free to reach out on the Discord. Feel free to send me an email, direct message on Twitter, however you feel comfortable reaching out to me. Okay. I hope this video helps, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you.